Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Kamal Mehboob from Physiology Department of Faisalabad Medical University. In this video, dear students, we are going to learn about the ventilation-perfusion ratio, its effect on the alveolar gas concentration. Before discussing this topic, I would like to tell you that what is the importance of this topic. Why we are going to discuss the ventilation-perfusion ratio. As we know that the structure of the lung that is very much peculiar. With the air filled abundant millions of alveoli, with the pulmonary capillaries filled with the blood. There is a great difference between the media, that is the air media, and the blood. Regarding the density, they are very much different to each other, so that creates some important ratio between the ventilation perfusion ratio, which is actually going to reflect the function of the lung. For the proper mechanism of respiration, we need ventilated air-filled alveolus with the proper blood-filled pulmonary capillary. So both of these factors, they are necessary for the normal mechanism of the respiration. If there is any factor missing or abnormal, that will going to disturb the ventilation perfusion ratio, which is ultimately reflecting the function of the lung. Now we are able to discuss this topic in detail. When the alveolar ventilation, the symbol for the alveolar ventilation is VA with the dot on the upper side. If it is normal for a given alveolus and the perfusion, that is, the symbol is Q over dot, is also normal for the same alveolus, the ventilation perfusion ratio, which is shown in this diagram, in this symbol, is also said to be normal. When the ventilation is 0, yet there is still perfusion of the alveolus, the ventilation perfusion ratio that will become 0. Or at the other extreme, when there is inadequate ventilation but 0 perfusion, the ratio is infinite. As this is the ventilation, if it is 0, so that the 0 is divided by the perfusion, the net result will be 0. And here the perfusion, if it is 0, then ventilation divided by 0, the result will be infinite. This is the diagram which is called the ventilation perfusion diagram. And this is also your assignment. Draw and label this diagram properly. I am showing this also, that is the venous blood lower zone and also the inspired air upper zone. How we are going to label these things here? The background for that is, if the alveolar oxygen and carbon dioxide partial pressure, if it equals to 0, that is the ventilation perfusion ratio that is shown here in the on the upper side, that if the ventilation perfusion ratio is 0, what happens? That without any alveolar ventilation, the air in the alveolus comes to the equilibrium with the blood oxygen and carbon dioxide, because these gases diffuse between the blood and the alveolar air. So regarding the composition of the oxygen and carbon dioxide at this pole, that is in the lower zone, what happens? Because the blood that perfuses the capillaries is venous blood returning to the lung from the systemic circulation, so the gas in the blood that will be equal to the alveolar gases. While on the other side, when the alveolar oxygen carbon dioxide partial pressure becomes infinite with the ventilation perfusion ratio, that is this one. How the composition is here? The effect on the alveolus gas pressure pressure when ventilation perfusion ratio equals to infinite is entirely different from the effect when ventilation perfusion ratio is zero, because there is no capillary blood flow to carry oxygen away or to bring carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Therefore, instead of the alveolar gases coming to the equilibrium with the venous blood, the alveolar air comes equal to the humidified or the inspired air. So, in the upper zone, you have the gases with the composition which are going to match the inspired air or the humidified air, while in the lower zone, the composition of the gases that are going to match with the venous blood, because there is no ventilation. How the change occurred in the composition of the gases? There is no air, and here the no blood, and both of these factors, they are necessary for proper mechanism of respiration. While here in the normal alveolar air, this is the situation in which you have the proper air ventilated alveoli with the proper perfusion. So here the composition of the gases, that is the normal air, alveolar air with the partial pressure of the oxygen which is 104, and the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide, that is the 40. This is a very important diagram. Draw and label this diagram and also learn it very carefully. Now that is the concept of the physiological shunt and the physiological dead space. When the ventilation is inadequate to provide the oxygen needed to fully oxygenate the blood flowing through the alveolar capillaries, certain fraction of the venous blood passing through the pulmonary capillary does not become oxygenated. This fraction is called shunted blood. Total quantitative amount of shunted blood per minute is called the physiological shunt, and it can be calculated here by this equation. In this equation, the QPS is the physiological shunt blood flow per minute, while the QT is the cardiac output per minute. The CI, that is the concentration of oxygen in the arterial blood. If there is an ideal ventilation perfusion ratio, CA, that is the concentration of oxygen, is the measured concentration of oxygen in the arterial blood, and CV is the measured concentration of oxygen in the mixed venous blood. The greater the physiological shunt, the greater the amount of blood that fails to be oxygenated as it passes through the lungs. On the other hand, we have the concept of the physiological dead space. What is that one? When the ventilation perfusion ratio is greater than the normal. When ventilation of some of the alveoli is great, but the alveolar blood flow is low, there is far more available oxygen in the alveoli that can be transported away from the alveoli by the flowing blood. Thus, the ventilation of these alveoli is said to be wasted. The ventilation of the anatomical dead space areas of the respiratory passageways is also wasted. The sum of these two types of wasted ventilation is called the physiological dead space. This is measured in the clinical pulmonary function laboratory by making appropriate blood and expiratory gas measurement and using the following equation. You can see this equation that is meant for the physiological dead space when the ventilation perfusion is greater than the normal, as we have in the upper zone. In this equation, the VT, that is the physiological dead space, VT is the tidal volume, and you know the tidal volume, that is the normal inspired or expired volume of the air in the resting state. So P is the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide in the arterial blood, and P is the average partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the entire expired air. When physiological dead space is great, much of the ventilation is wasted effort because no much of the ventilating air never reaches the blood. Regarding the abnormalities of the ventilation perfusion ratio, the number one thing that is the abnormal ventilation perfusion ratio in the upper and the lower normal lung, and we have already discussed this one in much more detail. The next thing, that is the abnormal ventilation perfusion in chronic obstructive lung disease. Chronic obstructive lung diseases, that is the obstruction is caused so that the respiratory mechanism that is disturbed. The obstruction may be because of the excessive mucus or because of any foreign particle, but the chronic obstructive lung disease is, for example, as we have the asthma, in which the abnormal mucus excessive secretion is creating problem and causing obstruction to the respiratory passages. In a normal person in the upright position, both pulmonary capillary blood flow and alveolar ventilation are considerably less in the upper part of the lung than in the lower part, and there we have the physiological dead space, and in the low, that is the other extreme, in the bottom we can have the physiological shunt. Another example for the obstructive lung disease, that is in disease condition like emphysema. As I have already told you that emphysema is a disease in which the alveolar size that becomes much more larger with the destruction of in between the alveolar walls. So in that case, emphysema in turn causes many of the alveolar walls to be destroyed, and these two conditions occur in the smokers also. To cause abnormal ventilation perfusion ratio. What is that one? That because many of the small bronchioles are obstructed, the alveoli beyond the obstruction are unventilated, causing ventilation perfusion ratio that appropriates 0. And secondly, in those areas of the lung where the alveolar walls have been mainly destroyed but there is still alveolar ventilation, most of the ventilation is wasted and we have the inadequate blood flow to transport the blood gases. So there we have the serious physiological dead space and also the serious physiological shunt. Both of these factors, both of these things, they are present in the chronic obstructive lung diseases. This is a special diagram in which I am showing you This is the diagram in which I am going to show you the normal ventilation perfusion ratio, low, extremely low and high. This is the normal condition, having the air-filled alveolus with the proper ventilated, with the proper perfusion. This you can see the impaired ventilation. There is any obstruction to this one, so that we can have the low ventilation perfusion ratio and hypoxemia. There is extremely low ventilation perfusion ratio and we can have the shunt. And here we have the high ventilation perfusion ratio and you can see the impaired perfusion because of any obstruction, but the alveoli, that is the it is properly ventilated but it is useless because of the impaired perfusion. So the end result, that is the high ventilation perfusion ratio. So dear students, this is all about the ventilation perfusion ratio. Keep watching my next video and learn it by heart. Thank you.